Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Jessica Hutchins from Inspire Wellness, and Dr. Dan Neides is not going to be joining us today because he's got other commitments, so it's just going to be me. And today we are talking about the well-known trial that the verdict came in last week on Monsanto versus Mr. Johnson, a man who, through his job, had been using Roundup, which I think everybody knows what Roundup is, and one of the most dangerous ingredients in Roundup, glyphosate. So he was using that throughout his career, and he actually had an accident in 2012 where he was exposed to a lot of it. And so he rounded up some great lawyers, and they really fought hard to win, and this is an immense victory. And the reason I feel like it's so important to discuss, honestly, is because we tend to have an opinion that if something is on the market, if something is on the shelf, if the government approves something, that it's going to be safe. So we don't need to figure that out as consumers when we go to the store, right? So if something's not safe to use on our home garden, on our home lawn, to eat food sprayed with Roundup, then it just wouldn't exist. So hopefully this is a really big wake-up call to all of you. You know, you got to think for yourselves. You got to pull out the research for yourselves. And you can't be blinded just because the government does not outlaw. And in other countries that might be different. The government might be a little bit more in our court, and it's harder to pass things through governmental approval, but in this country it does not appear to be the case. So again, for those of you who don't know, Monsanto was found guilty in a bunch of different claims, and they ended up making the verdict of $289 million against Monsanto for Mr. Johnson. He developed lymphoma, most likely as a result of the Roundup exposure. So I wanted to read claim by claim, just really quickly, and I have to read them because there are too many words to memorize. But again, just pay attention to all of this wording, and it's not just about Roundup and glyphosate being carcinogenic, being toxic. It's about the cover-up and the fact that there's no label, there's no warning, there's nothing, and it seems as if that might have been purposeful. So the first claim, are the Roundup Pro or Ranger Pro products one about which an ordinary consumer can form reasonable minimum safety expectations? And the jury answered yes. Did Roundup Pro fail to perform as safely as an ordinary consumer would have expected when used or misused in an intended or reasonably foreseeable way? Yes, the answer is yes. Was Roundup Pro design a substantial factor in causing harm to Mr. Johnson? The answer, yes. Did Roundup Pro have potential risks that were known or knowable in light of the scientific knowledge that was generally accepted in the scientific community at the time of their manufacture, distribution, or sale? The answer, yes. Did the potential risks pose a substantial danger to those using or misusing Roundup in an intended or reasonably foreseeable way? The answer, yes. Would ordinary consumers recognize the potential risks? The answer is no. And again, that's one of the reasons we're doing these Facebook Live groups, is to try to educate people on things that are not so obvious in the vast marketing employees that are out there. Did Monsanto fail to adequately warn of potential risks? Yes, that is a big deal. Was lack of sufficient warnings a substantial factor in causing harm to Mr. Johnson? The answer is yes. Did Monsanto know that Roundup is dangerous when used or misused in a reasonably foreseeable manner? The answer, yes. Did Monsanto know, or should have they reasonably known, that users would not realize the danger? The answer, yes. Did Monsanto fail to adequately warn of the danger or instruction on the safe use of Roundup? The answer, yes. Would a reasonable manufacturer, distributor, or seller under the same or similar circumstances have warned of the danger? Yes. Was Monsanto's failure to warn a substantial factor in causing harm to Mr. Johnson? The answer, yes. So that's how the jury answered all the questions, and that's how the judge awarded the $289 million award to Mr. Johnson. So again, this is a very big deal. Do your research, and in addition to all of that, avoid glyphosate. So it absolutely has plenty of scientific evidence that it it causes disruption in our bodies. And I know on our other Facebook Live videos, I explained the shikimate pathway. So this is kind of an interesting excuse that Monsanto and others have been using, some farms have been using for a while, that the glyphosate disrupts the shikimate enzymatic pathway, which is in plants, in other bacteria, in other species. It is not in humans. So therefore, ingesting glyphosate cannot be toxic to humans because we don't have the pathway that it disrupts. But guess what? Very important substances do have that pathway, our good bacteria, our gut microbiome. So every time your gut microbiome is exposed to glyphosate, which is potentially, 3, 6, 7 times a day in the normal traditional American diet, absolutely can disrupt the good bacteria. And gut health, Hippocrates knew this years ago, but gut health is the basis for good health or disease. It absolutely is, no matter what chronic disease you're talking about. So let me get into specifics on ways that we can avoid glyphosate. And this seems to be one of the last things people avoid. They can clean up their house a little, clean up their personal care products, maybe buy organic when they eat at home sometimes if things are the right price or on sale. Maybe get grass-fed beef sometimes at farmers markets. But when you go to a restaurant, you just kind of turn a blind eye and just accept all of the glyphosate and the toxicity that you're eating. Again, this is a big deal, and you might want to rethink this. You might want to go out of your way to avoid the glyphosate and the Roundup. But some of the crops that it's used on the most are GMO crops for sure. I mean, the GMO seeds were kind of created in order to be Roundup ready. So almost by definition, GMO crops are going to use Roundup. So there's sugar beets, alfalfa, corn, soy, and then I do want to mention one here that I don't talk a lot about, in my one-on-one consultations with patients, but thinking back on it, it really can be a problem. There's certainly an epidemic of young teenage girls having anxiety, depression, polycystic ovary syndrome, abnormal periods, metabolic syndrome, being overweight, having trouble with acne and mood, etc. Since cotton is one of the most heavily sprayed crops, all these girls are wearing regular pads and tampons, 5 to 7 days out of every month. And the tampons, I'm assuming, are a lot worse exposure. So please consider, if you're a teenage girl, or more likely your mom is watching this, then buy organic products for your daughters. Teach them the dangers of glyphosate. And it does matter, it really does. It's not like it's once a year where you're using these products. It's several days every month. So keep that in mind for anybody with a child who's having trouble with their periods, mood, or PCOS for sure. Then there are other crops that are sprayed heavily right before they're harvested. For example, wheat. Wheat can technically not be called GMO or genetically modified, but we know it has a very excessive glyphosate load because as it's harvested, it's sprayed to help prevent, the berries from growing any further. And some of the other crops that are sprayed include lentils and beans as well. So again, it has probably double or triple the dose of a regular crop because they use it before harvest. So definitely those, you want to avoid GMOs, you want to avoid the glyphosate for sure, and you want to get organic. It is worth it. Oh, here's Dr. Neides. He's joining us. I don't even have a chair for him. Want to sit right here?
Hi, everybody. Sorry I'm late. Just with another patient. I'll grab a chair. Sorry.
So again, in addition to just knowing how to avoid them and trying to not frequent restaurants unless the restaurants provide some sort of either GMO-free or organic type menu options, which there are some restaurants in Cleveland that do that. But if you're knowingly exposed, then there's some supplements that can help for sure. So if you know you're going to eat a horrible meal full of a lot of toxins, taking charcoal either with or about an hour after your meal will help mop up some of those toxins so they don't get absorbed in your gut. N-acetylcysteine, which is the precursor to glutathione, that can help break things down, break the toxins down, and then glutathione itself, which probably everybody should be on in this day and age, honestly. And then I do want to say something about the N-acetylcysteine. So we're taught that cysteine is more often than not the rate-limiting step in making glutathione, again, the master detoxifier. But glyphosate actually acts as glycine. It's a very similar chemical structure. There's a glycine molecule in the glyphosate molecule. And glycine, glutamine, and cysteine make up glutathione. So I'm wondering, instead of cysteine being the rate-limiting step, perhaps glyphosate is more of a burden than we're realizing now, because that is blocking the synthesis of glutathione because it's going into the molecule right where the glycine would be. And so what ends up is not glutathione, but it's something completely different, probably toxic for your body. So, I would say avoid glyphosate as much as you can, but if you are exposed to it, charcoal, N-acetylcysteine, glutathione, Epsom salt baths, increase your mineral intake. Minerals help detoxification as well. Anything else you can think of?
So did you talk at all about charcoal when you mentioned that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And probiotics too, I guess, because if glyphosate wipes out your good bacteria, then you want to replenish it. But there's nothing like keeping the good bacteria there by feeding them the things they need and not feeding them the things that are going to kill them. So probiotics can be a very transient means to an end, but you really do need to take over and keep those good bacteria there, because they'll come right out of your system if you don't.
So the soluble fiber, eating, right, artichoke,
Fiber,
asparagus,
all the prebiotic foods,
all the good spices that seem to help the good bacteria as well would obviously be pretty critical.
Right. Yeah. And then turmeric or curcumin might help with the inflammation from glyphosate as well, too. And definitely wash your food if it's not organic, but that by no means gets rid of the glyphosate. It's usually, wrapped into the fruit and vegetable itself, for sure. And then you want to get organic meat too, for lots and lots of reasons, but organic, non-organic animals surely get fed GMO corn products and GMO whatever other feed that they feed the animals. So if they're having a high glyphosate load and their toxins are stored in their fat and you're eating fat from those animals, you're going to get the same inflammation. And, assuming their gut bacteria is also wiped out. And if the gut is the basis of health, then those animals are going to be inherently unhealthy by being exposed to all the glyphosate as well.
And did you talk at all about herbicides and pesticides for everybody's lawn? Like trying to avoid what we're doing to our...
Not enough, no.
Right. So again, I think this is more than just identifying what is in our contaminated food supply, but we also want to be mindful of where our pets and our children, where they're playing, and we continue to see fertilizers being used, whether they're a component of Roundup, because I do see people spraying their driveways and in their gardens, whatnot. But it's basically still the same issue that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a product that has significant toxicity to the human body. And anything that we can do to decrease that burden is going to go a long way. As we keep talking about week after week after week, with inflammation, deficiencies of vitamins and minerals, and an inability to detoxify, I really believe what I see in the majority of my patients is the challenge is detoxifying is what holds most people back. Mm-hmm. And so however we decrease that overall burden is going to go a long way toward maximizing our health and achieving a higher quality of life. And that does start with, what we're doing in and around our homes. And it's not just about what we're ingesting, it's what we're exposing ourselves to. And the patients that I just finished seeing, they told me that they were living in around Columbus, Ohio, where around Marysville, where there's a cluster, a cancer cluster, and it's believed because there are so many farms around where they were living that are spraying glyphosate or Roundup, that after 6 months, this family ended up moving back to where they were from because they were so concerned about what they were seeing, and then the answers that they weren't getting from the health department. I found that interesting as well.
Scary. Yeah.
So again, my point is you have to be your own advocate. I mean, this is not about reading online or looking at government websites and trying to get information. I mean, you have to be your own advocate. You have to do your own research. And we always tell our patients, don't just take our word for it. Whatever information we're telling you, look into it. And if you discover something beyond what we've told you, share it. Mm-hmm. We don't know everything. And so anything that we learn from you that can help other patients, we would certainly want to be able to share. So again, I think this is just one other area that, beyond just what we may be taking into our bodies, but what are we surrounding ourselves with in terms of herbicides and pesticides.
And golf courses are another thing that people don't think about. Golf courses, to keep all that green and pretty looking, they spray all the time. So not only golfers, but more importantly, people who live right next to or downstream wind
Absolutely.
from the golf courses. You do have to be mindful of that for sure.
Excellent. Any other take-home messages? Again, apologize for my tardiness. I realize we're a quarter of the hour.
If anybody has suggestions for non-toxic sprays that they can use to, for their yard, for their garden, please feel free to post them. Also, the Environmental Working Group, as most of you guys know by now, has a Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen list. I would recommend absolutely eating 100% organic, but if you can't, then definitely try to eat the organic on the Dirty Dozen list for sure.
And, I would definitely continue to follow the story regarding the recent lawsuit that Robert Kennedy Jr. was able to successfully provide a monumental settlement for his client. I don't know if it's settlement, but it was at least a decision. But my point is there's going to be thousands more coming down the road.
Yeah, I read that there were 4,000 in the pipeline now already.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg as we learn more and more about what this exposure has done to alter our body chemistry and has ultimately led to an increase in cancer risk. This is going to be a story that continues to explode on monumental levels.
Right.
So,
and it's not just about, I don't want to get cancer in 20 years. I mean, it affects every single function in your body potentially. So people that are fatigued or have brain fog or have gut problems or have an autoimmune disease or, certainly cancer. I mean, any of those, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, it absolutely is important. And it's going to be one of the chemical disruptors in your chemical pathways, like we always talk about. So
excellent. Well,
it's important.
Again, appreciate your time. We will be with you next week on August 28th at 12:30 Eastern Time for another exciting edition of Living at Your Highest Quality of Life. So thank you so much for joining us. Remember, it's your time to thrive.
Let us inspire you.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.